Chapter 35 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. Chapter 35. HOUGH. Midsummer in the desert. The road now, but for the shifting of the sands, would have been marked by the bodies of dead cattle. In death scarcely more bone and parchment than for days they had been while alive. The horned toad, the cactus, the rattlesnake long since had replaced the prairie dogs of the grassy floor of the eastern plains. A scourge of great black crickets appeared, crackling lonesomely under the wheels. Sagebrush and sand took the place of trees and grass as they left the river valley and crossed a succession of ridges or plateaus. At last they reached vast black basaltic masses and lava fields, proof of former subterranean fires which seemingly had forever dried out the life of the earth's surface. The very vastness of the views might have had charm but for the tempering feeling of awe, of doubt, of fear. They had followed the trail over the immemorial tribal crossings over heights of land lying between the heads of streams. From the Green River, which finds the great canyons of the Colorado, they came into the vast horseshoe valley of the Bear, almost circumventing the Great Salt Lake, but unable to forsake it at last. West and south now rose bold mountains around whose northern extremity the river had felt its way, and back of these lay fold on folds of lofty ridges, now softened by the distances. Of all the splendid landscapes of the Oregon Trail, this one had few rivals. But they must leave this and cross to yet another, though less inviting vast river valley of the series which led them across the continent. Out of the many wagons which Jesse Wingate originally had captained, now not 100 remained in his detachment when it took the sagebrush plateaus below the Great Snake River. They still were back of the Missouri train, no doubt several days, but no message left on a cleft stick at camp cheered them or enlightened them. And now still another defection had cut down the train. Woodhull, moody and irascible, feverish and excited by turns, ever since leaving Bridger, had held secret conclaves with a few of his adherents, the nature of which he did not disclose. There was no great surprise and no extreme regret when, within safe reach of Fort Hall, he had announced his intention of going on ahead with a dozen wagons. He went without obtaining any private interview with Molly Wingate. These matters, none the less, had their depressing effect. Few illusions remained to any of them now, and no romance. Yet they went on, 10 miles, 15 sometimes, though rarely 20 miles a day. Women fell asleep, babes in arms, jostling on the wagon seats. Men almost slept as they walked, ox-whip in hand. The cattle slept as they stumbled on, tongues dry and lolling. All the earth seemed strange, unreal. They advanced as though in a dream through some inferno of a crazed imagination. About them now often rose the wavering images of the mirage, offering water, trees, wide landscapes, beckoning in such desert deceits as they often now had seen. One day, as the brazen sun mocked them from its zenith, they saw that they were not alone on the trail. "Look, mother!" exclaimed Molly Wingate. She now rode with her mother on the seat of the family wagon, Jed driving her cart when not on the cow column. "See, there's a caravan!" Her cry was echoed or anticipated by scores of voices of others who had seen the same thing. They pointed west and south. Surely there was a caravan, a phantom caravan, far off, gigantic, looming and lowering again. It paralleled the advance of their own train, which in numbers it seemed to equal. Slowly, steadily, irresistibly, awesomely, it kept pace with them, sending no sign to them, mockingly indifferent to them, mockingly so, indeed. For when the leaders of the Wingate wagons paused, the riders of the ghostly train paused also, biding their time with no action to indicate their intent. When the advance was resumed, the uncanny pari passu again went on, the rival caravan going forward as fast, no faster than those who regarded it in a fascinated interest that began to become fear. Yonder caravan could bode no good. Without doubt it planned an ambush farther on, and this sinister indifference meant only its certainty of success. Or were there, then, other races of men out here in this unknown world of heat and sand? Was this a treasure train of old Spanish cargadores? Did ghosts live and move as men? If not, what caravan was this, moving alone, far from the beaten trail? What purpose had it here? "Look, mother!" The girl's voice rose eagerly again, but this time with a laugh in it, and her assurance passed down the line, others laughing in relief at the solution. "It's ourselves," said Molly. "It's the Fata Morgana. But how marvelous! Who could believe it?" Indeed, the mirage had taken that rare and extraordinary form. The mirage of their own caravan, rising, was reflected, mirrored by some freak of the desert sun and air, upon the fine sand blown in the air at a distance from the train. It was, indeed, themselves they saw, not knowing it, in a vast primordial mirror of the desert gods. Nor did the discovery of the truth lessen the feeling of discomfort, of apprehension. The laughter was at best uneasy, until at last a turn in the trail, a shift in the wizardry of the heat waves, broke up the ghostly caravan and sent it, figure by figure, vehicle by vehicle, into the unknown whence it had come. "This country!" exclaimed Molly Wingate's mother. "It scares me. If Oregon's like this—" "It isn't, mother. It is rich and green with rains. There are great trees, many mountains, beautiful rivers where we are going, and there are fields of grain. There are homes." The sudden pathos of her voice drew her mother's frowning gaze. There, child," said she. "Don't you mind. We'll always have a home for you, your pa and me." The girl shook her head. "I sometimes think I'd better teach school and live alone." "And leave your parents?" "How can I look my father in the face every day, knowing what he feels about me? Just now he accuses me of ruining Sam Woodhull's life, driving him away, out of the train. But what could I do? Marry him after all? I can't. I'm glad he's gone, but I don't know why he went." "In my belief you haven't heard or seen the last of Sam Woodhull yet," mused her mother. "Sometimes a man gets sort of peeved, wants to marry a girl that jilts him more'n if she hadn't. And you certainly jilted him at the church door, if there'd been any church there. It was an awful thing, Molly. I don't know as I see how Sam stood it long as he did." "Haven't I paid for it, mother?" "Why, yes, one way of speaking. But that ain't the way men are going to call theirselves paid. Until he's married, a man's powerful set on having a woman. If he don't, he thinks he ain't paid. It don't scarcely make no difference what the woman does. No, I don't reckon he'll forget. About Will Banion. Don't let's mention him." "Mother, I'm trying to forget him." "Yes. Where do you reckon he is now? How far ahead?" "I don't know. I can't guess." The color on her cheek caught her mother's gaze. "Gee wo ha! Get along, Buck and Star," commanded the buxom dame to the swaying ox team that now followed the road with no real need of guidance. They took up the heat and burden of the desert. End of chapter 35.
Chapter 36 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. 2 Love Letters. "The families are comin'! Again the families!" It was again the cry of the passing fur post, looking eastward at the caravan of the West, bound to plows, much the same at old Fort Hall on the Snake River, and it was at Laramie on the North Platte, or Bridger on the waters tributary to the Green. The company clerks who looked out over the sandy plain saw miles away a dust cloud which meant but one thing. In time they saw the Wingate train come on, slowly, steadily, and deploy for encampment a mile away. The dusty wagons, their double covers stained, mildewed, torn, were scattered where each found the good grass. Then they saw scores of the emigrants, women as well as men, hastening to the post. It was now past midsummer. around the middle of the month of August, and the Wingate wagons had covered some 1,280 miles since the start at mid-May of last spring. More than 3 months of continuous travel, a trek before which the passage over the Appalachians 2 generations earlier wholly pales. What did they need here at Fort Hall, on the Snake, third and last settlement of 2,000 miles of toil and danger and exhaustion? They needed everything, but one question first was asked by these travel-sick, home-loving people. What was the news? News? How could there be news when almost a year would elapse before Fort Hall would know that on that very day, in the very month of August, 1848, Oregon was declared a territory of the Union? News? How could there be news when these men could not know for much more than a year that, as they outspanned here in the sage, Abraham Lincoln had just declined the governorship of the new territory of Oregon? Why? He did not know. Why had these men come here? They did not know. But news, the news! The families must have the news. And here always there was news. Just beyond branched off the trail to California. Here the supply trains from the Columbia brought news from the Oregon settlements. News? How slow it was, when it took a letter more than 2 years to go one way from edge to edge of the American continent. They told what news they knew, the news of the Mormons of 1847 and 1848, the last mutterings over fugitive Negro slaves, the growing feeling that the South would one day follow the teachings of the secession. They heard in payment the full news of the Whitman massacre in Oregon that winter. They gave back in turn their own news, battles with the Sioux and the Krause, the news of the new army post then moving west into the plains to clear them for the whites. News? Why, yes, large news enough, and on either hand, so the trade was fair. But these matters of the outside world were not the only ones of interest. Whether to the post traders or the newly arrived emigrants, had others preceded them? How many? When? Why, yes, a week earlier 50 wagons of one train, Missouri men, led by a man on a great black horse, and an old man, a hunter. Banion? Yes, that was the name. And the scout was Jackson, Bill Jackson, an old-time free trapper. Well, these two had split off for California, with 6 good pack mules, loaded light. The rest of the wagons had gone to the Snake. But why these two had brought the last shovels and the only pick and all the supplies at old Fort Hall no man could tell. Crazy, of course. For who could pause to work on the trail with pick or shovel, with winter coming on at the Sierra crossing? But not crazier than the other band who had come in 3 days ago. Also ahead on the main train. Woodhull? Yes, that was the name, Woodhull. He had 12 or 15 wagons with him, and had brought supplies for California, though they had all started for Oregon. Well, they soon would know more about the Marys River at the Humboldt Desert. Plenty of bones there, sure. But even so, a third of the trains these past 5 years had split off at the Raft River, and had given up hope of Oregon. California was much better, easier to reach, and better when you got there. The road to Oregon was horrible. The crossings of the Snake, especially the first crossing to the north bank, was a gamble with death for the whole train, and beyond that to the Blue Mountains the trail was no trail at all. Few ever would get through. No one knew how many had perished. 3 years ago Joe Meek had tried to find a better trail west of the Blues. All lost, so the story said. Why go to Oregon? Nothing there when you got there. California now had been settled and proved 100 years and more. Every year men came this far east to wait at Fort Hall for the emigrant trains, and to persuade them to go to California, not to Oregon. But what seemed strange to the men at the trading post was the fact that Banion had not stopped or asked a question. He appeared to have made up his mind long earlier, and beyond asking for shovels he had wanted nothing. The same way with Woodhull. He had come in fast and gone out fast, headed for the Raft River trail to California the very next morning. Why? Usually men stopped here at Fort Hall, rested, traded, got new stock, wanted to know about the trail ahead. Both Banion and Woodhull struck Fort Hall with their minds already made up. They did not talk. Was there any new word about the California trail down at Bridger? Had a new route over the Humboldt Basin been found, or something of that sort? How could that be? If so, it must be rough and needing work in places, else why the need for so many shovels? But maybe the emigrants themselves knew about these singular matters, or would when they had read their letters. Yes, of course, the Missouri movers had left a lot of letters. Some for their folks back east, next year maybe, but some for people in the train. Banion, Woodhull, had they left any word? Why, yes, both of them. The trader smiled. One each. To the same person, yes. Well, lucky girl. But that black horse now, the Nez Perce, would give 100 ponies for him, but he wouldn't trade. A sour man. But Woodhull now, the one with the wagons, talked more. And they had each left a letter for the same girl. And this was Miss Molly Wingate. Well, the trader did not blame them. These American girls, they were like roses to the old traders, cast away this lifetime out here in the desert. News? Why, yes. No train had ever come through that did not bring news and get news at the old Fort Hall, and so on. The enclosure of the old adobe fur trading post was thronged by men and women of the Wingate train. Molly Wingate at first was not among them. She sat, chin on her hand, on the wagon tongue in the encampment, looked out over the blue-gray desert to the red and gold glory of the sinking sun. Her mother came to her and placed in her lap 2 letters, stood watching her. One from each, she said sententiously, and turned away. The girl's face paled as she opened the one she felt sure would find her again, somewhere, somehow. It said, "Dearest, I write to Molly Wingate, because and only because I know she is still Molly Wingate. It might be kinder to both of us if I did not write at all, but went my way and left it all to time and silence. I found I could not. There will be no other woman in my life for me. I cannot lay any vow on you. If I could, if I dared, I would say, wait a year while I pray for a year, and God help us both. As you know, I now have taken your advice. Bridger and I joined for the California venture. If the gold is there, as Carson thinks, I may find more fortune than I have earned. More than I could earn you gave me when I was young. That was 2 months ago, now I am old. Keep the news of gold, if it can be kept, as long as you can. No doubt it will spread from other sources. But so far as I know, and thanks only to you, I am well ahead of any other venture from the East this season. And, as you know, winter soon will seal the trails against followers. Next year, 1849, will be the big rush, if it all does not flatten. I can think of no one who would have shared our secret. Carson will be East by now, but he is a government man, and close of mouth with strangers. Bridger, I am sure, for the odd reason that he worships you, will tell no one else, especially since he shares profits with me, if I survive and succeed. One doubt only rests in my mind. At his post I talked with Bridger. and he told me he had a few other bits of gold that Carson had given him at Laramie. He looked for them but had lost them. He suspected his Indian women, but he knew nothing. Of course, it would be one chance in 1,000 that anyone would know the women had these things, and even so, no one could tell where the gold came from, because not even the women would know that. Not even Bridger knows exactly, not even I myself. In general, I am headed for the valley of the Sacramento. I shall work north. Why? Because that will be toward Oregon. I write as though I expected to see you again, as though I had a right to expect or hope for that. It is only the dead young man, Will Banion, who unjustly and wrongly craves and calls out for the greatest of all fortune for a man, who unfairly and wrongly writes you now, when he ought to remember your word, to go to a land far from you, to forget you live, and to live down his past. Ah, if I could! Ah, if I did not love you! But being perhaps about to die away from you, the truth only must be between you and me. And the truth is, I shall never forget you. The truth is, I love you more than anything else and everything else in the world. If I were in other ways what man of your choice should be, would this truth have any weight with you? I do not know, and I dare not ask. Reason does tell me how selfish it would be to ask you to hold in your heart a memory and not a man. That is for me to do, to have a memory, and not you. But my memory never can content me. It seems as though time had been invented so that through all eons our feet might run in search, one for the other to meet. Where? Well, we did meet, for one instant, in the uncounted ages, there on the prairie. Well, if ever you do see me again, you shall say whether I have been indeed tried by fire, and whether it has left me clean, whether I am a man and not a memory. That I perhaps have been a thief, stealing what never could be mine, is my great agony now, but I love you. Goodbye. William Hayes Banion, to Margaret Wingate, Fort Hall, in Oregon. For an hour Molly sat, and the sun sank. The light of the whole world died. The other letter rested unopened until later, when she broke the seal and read by the light of the sagebrush fire. She frowned. Could it be that in the providence of God she once had been within one deliberate step of marrying Samuel Payson Woodhull? My darling Molly, this I hope finds you well after the hard journey from Bridger to Hall. They call it cruel to keep a secret from a woman. If so, I have been cruel, though only in poor pay for your cruelty to me. I have had a secret, and this it is. I have left for California from this point and shall not go to Oregon. I have learned of gold in the state of California, and have departed to that state in hope of early success in achieving a fortune. So far as I know, I am the first to have this news of gold, unless a certain man, whose name and thought I execrate, has been by his usual dishonesty fallen on the same information. If so, we two may meet where none can interfere. I do not know how long I may be in California, but be sure I go for but the one purpose of amassing a fortune for the woman I love. I never have given you up and never shall. Your promise is mine, and our engagement has never been broken, and the mere fact that accident for a time prevented our nuptials by no means shall ever mean that we shall not find happy consummation of our most cherished desire at some later time. I confidently hope to arrive in Oregon a rich man not later than 1 or 2 years from now. Wait for me. I am mad without you, and shall count the minutes until when I can take you in my arms and kiss you 1,000 times. Forgive me, I have not heretofore told you of these plans, but it was best not, and it was for you. Indeed, you are so much in my thought, my darling, that each and everything I do is for you and you only. No more at present then, but should opportunity offer, I shall get word to you addressed to Oregon City, which your father said was his general destination, it being my own present purpose ultimately to engage in the practice of law either at that point or the settlement of Portland, which I understand is not far below. With my means we shall soon be handsomely settled. May God guard you on the way thither, and believe me, darling, with more love than I shall ever be able to tell, and 1,000 kisses. Your affianced and impatient lover, Samuel Payson Woodhull. The little sage-brush fire flared up brightly for an instant as Molly Wingate dropped one of her letters on the embers. End of chapter 36.
Chapter 37 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. Chapter 37. Jim Bridger Forgets. "What's wrong with the people, Cale?" demanded Jesse Wingate of his stout-hearted associate, Caleb Price. The sun was 2 hours high, but not all the breakfast fires were going. Men were moody, truculent, taciturn, as they went about their duties. Caleb Price bit into his yellow beard as he gazed down the irregular lines of the encampment. "Do you want me to tell you the truth, Jesse?" "Why, yes." "Well, then, it seems to me the truth is that this train has lost focus." "I don't know what you mean." "I don't know that I'm right, don't know I can make my guess plain. Of course, every day we lay up, the whole train goes to pieces. The thing to do is to go a little way each day, get into the habit. You can't wear out a road as long as this one by spurts. It's steady does it." "But I don't think that's at all. The main trouble is one that I don't like to hint to you, especially since none of us can help it." "Out with it, Cale." "The trouble is, the people don't think they've got a leader." Jesse Wingate colored above his beard. "That's pretty hard," said he. "I know it's hard, but I guess it's the truth. You and I and Hall and Kelsey, we're accepted as the chief council, but there are 4 of us, and all this country is new to all of us. The men now are like a bunch of cattle ready to stampede. They're nervous, ready to jump at anything. Wrong way, Jesse. They ought to be as steady as any of the trains that have gone across. 1843 when the Applegates crossed, 1846 when the Donners went, every year since. Our folks, well, if you ask me, I think they're scared." "That's hard, Cale." "Yes, hard for me to say to you, with your wife sad and your girl just now able to sit up. Yes, it's hard. Harder still, since we both know it's your own personal matter, this quarrel with those 2 young men, which I don't need explain. That's at the bottom of the train's uneasiness." "Well, they've both gone now." "Yes, both. If half of the both were here now, you'd see the people quiet. Oh, you can't explain leadership, Jesse. Some have it, most don't. He had. We know he had. I don't suppose many of those folks ever figured it out, or do now, but they'd fall in, not knowing why. As it is, I'll admit there seems to be something in the air. They say birds know when an earthquake is coming. I feel uneasy myself, and don't know why. I started for Oregon. I don't know why. Do you suppose—" The speculations of either man ceased as both caught sight of a little dust cloud far off across the sage, steadily advancing down the slope. "Huh! Who's that, Jesse?" commented the Ohio leader. "Get your big glass, Jesse." Wingate went to his wagon and returned with the great telescope he sometimes used, emblem of his authority. "1 man, 2 packs," said he presently. "All alone as far as I can see. He's Western enough, some post trapper, I suppose. Rides like an Indian and dressed like one, but he's white because he has a beard." "Let me see." Price took the glass. "He looks familiar. See if you don't think it's Jim Bridger. What's he coming for? 200 miles away from his own post." It was Jim Bridger, as the next hour proved, and why he came he himself was willing to explain after he had eaten and smoked. "I camped 12 mile back," said he, and pushed in this morning. I just had an idea I'd saunter over in here, see how you's getting along. Is your whole train made here?" "No," Wingate answered. "The Missouri wagons are ahead. Is Woodhull with you?" "No." "Where's he at?" "We don't know. Major Banion and Jackson, with half a dozen packs, no wagons, have given us the trip. They've split off for California, left their wagons." "And so has Sam Woodhull, eh?" "We suppose so. That's the word. He took about 15 wagons with him. That's why we look cut down." "Rest of you going on through, huh?" "I am. I hope the others will." "It's 3 days on to where the road leaves for Californy on Raft River. Maybe more leave you there, huh?" "We don't know. We hope not. I hear the fords are bad, especially the crossing of the Snake. This is a big river. My people are uneasy about it." "Yes, it's bad enough right often. There's falls in them canyons hundreds of feet high, making a roaring you can hear 40 mile, maybe. The big falls around 200 mile ahead. That'd make me 400 mile away from home, and 400 to ride back again, huh? Is that far enough for an old man with snow coming on soon?" "You don't mean you'd guide us on that far? What charge?" "I come for that mainly. Charge ye? I won't charge ye nothing. What do you suppose Jim Bridger'll care if ye all was drownded in the Snake? Ain't there plenty more pilgrims where you all come from? Won't they be out here next year, with money to spend with my partner Vasquez and me?" "Then how could we pay you?" "You can't. Where's Miss Molly?" "You want to see her?" "Yes, else why'd I ask?" "Come," said Wingate, and led the way to Molly's little cart. The girl was startled when she saw the old scout, her wide eyes asking the question. "Mornin', Miss Molly," he began, his leathery face wrinkling in a smile. "You didn't expect me, and I didn't neither. I'm glad you're about well of that arrow wound. I carried a arrowhead under my shoulder blade several years onct, until Preacher Whitman cut it out. It felt right crawly all the time till then. Yes, I just sauntered up a couple 100 mile this morning, Miss Molly, just to see how you's all getting along, one thing or another." Without much regard to others, he now led Molly a little apart and seated her on the sage beside him. "Will Banion and Bill Jackson was went on to Californy, Miss Molly," said he. "You know why." Molly nodded. "You'd ought to. Ye told 'em." "Yes, I did." "I know. Him and me had a talk. Owing you and me all he'll ever make. He allowed to pay nothing, which is admittin' he loves you. He don't take no advice to finish that wedding with another man substituted. No, says he. I can't marry her because I love her, says he. Now that's crazy. Something deep under that, Miss Molly. Let's not talk about it, please." "All right. Let's talk about Sam Woodhull, eh?" "No." "Then maybe I'd better be going. I know you don't want to talk about me." His wrinkling smile said he had more to tell. "Miss Molly," he said at last, "I might as well tell you. Sam Woodhull is on the way after Will Banion. He's like enough picked out a fine bunch of horse thieves to go along with him. He knows something about the gold. I just found out how. You see, some men ain't above shinin' up to an Injun woman even, such being mebbe lonesome. Sam Woodhull wasn't. He seed one of my family wearin' a shiny thing on her neck. Hit were a piece of gold Kit give me after I'd give you mine. He trades the women out of a necklace for all of 2 pesos Mexican, but she not talking Missouri and him not talking Shoshone, they don't git from what the gold came from. She done told him she got it from me, but he don't say a word to me about that. He's too wise. But she did tell him how Will Banion gets the mules and packs of me. From then, plain guessin', he allows to watch Banion. My women keeps sayin', not meanin' no harm, that there's plenty more necklaces in Califor, because she's heard me and Banion say that word, Californy. Slim guessin' it were, Miss Molly, but enough for a man keen as Sam, that's not particular neither. His plan was to watch where the packs went. He knowed if Banion went to Oregon, he'd not use packs. Huh! Fine time he'll have, follerin' that boy and them mules with wagons. I'm easier when I think o' that, because, Miss Molly, if them 2 does meet away from friends o' both, there's goin' to be trouble, and trouble only o' one kind." Again Miss Molly nodded, pale and silent. "Well, a man has to take care of his own self," went on Bridger. "But that ain't all ner most what brung me here." "What was it, then?" demanded Molly. "A long ride." "Yeh, 800 miles out and back. If I see you across the Snake like I allow I'd better do. I'm doing it for you, Miss Molly. I'm old and you're young. I'm a wild man and you're one of God's women. But I had sisters oncet. White they was, like you. So the 800 miles is light. But that ain't why I come neither. Or all why yet. What is it then you want to tell me? Is it about him?" Bridger nodded. "Yes. The only trouble is, I don't know what it is." "Now you're foolish." "Sure I am. If I had a few drinks o' good liquor mebbe I'd be foolisher, or wiser. Leastways I'd be more like I was when I plumb forgot what 'twas Kit Carson said to me when we was spreein' at Laramie. He had something to do, something he was goin' to do, something I was to do for him, and mebbe so, next season, after he got East and got things done he was goin' to do. You see, Kit's in the army." "Was it about him?" "That's what I can't tell. I just sauntered over here a few hundred mile to ask you what you suppose it is that I've plumb forgot, me not having the same kind o' liquor right now. When me and Bill was having a few, afore he left, I was right on the point of remembering what it was I was forgetting. I don't make no doubt if Kit and me, or Bill and me, could only meet and drink along a day, so it'd all come plain to me. But all by myself and sober, and not sociable with dang your eyes just now, I swear I can't think o' nothing. What's a girl's mind fer if it ain't to think o' things?" "It was about him. It was about Kit Carson, something he had. Was it about the gold news?" "Mebbe. I don't know." "Did he, Mr. Banion, say anything?" "Mostly about you, and not much. He only said if I ever got any mail to send it to the judge in the Willamette settlements." "He does expect to come back to Oregon?" "How can I tell? My belief, he'd better jump in the Pacific Ocean. He's a damn fool, Miss Molly. If a man loves a woman, that's something that never ought to wait. Yet he goes teetering around like he had, from now to doomsday, to marry the girl which he loves too much for to marry her. That makes me sick. Yet he has resemblances to a man, too, some ways. Faint resemblances, yes. For instance, I'll bet a gunflint these here people that's been hearin' about the ford o' the Snake 'd be a hull lot gladder if they knew Will Banion was along, huh?" Molly Wingate was looking far away, pondering many things. "Well, anyways, hit's even Steven for them both two now," went on Bridger, "and may God protect the right and the devil take the hindmostest. They'll like enough both marry Injun women and settle down in Californy, out o' sight, out o' mind. Love me little, love me long. Lord Lovell, he's mounted his milk-white steed. Farewell, sweet sir. Parting is such sweet sorrer, like old Captain Bonneville used to say. But o' all the messes any fool bunch o' pilgrims ever got into, this is the worstest, and it couldn't be no worser. Now, Miss Molly, you're a plumb disappointment to me. I just drapped in to see if you couldn't tell me what it was Kit done told me, but you can't. Were it your boasted superiorness as a woman? But now, me, having done 40 mile a day over that country yan, I need sustenance, and I'm goin' to see if old Captain Grant, the post trader, has ary a bit of Hudson Bay rum left. If he has hits mine, and if not, Jim Bridger's a liar, and that I say deliberate. I'm going to try and get into normal condition enough for to remember a few plain, simple truths, seein' as you can't. Way it is, this train's in a hell of a fix, and it couldn't be no worser." End of chapter 37.
Chapter 38 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. Chapter 38. When the Rockies Fell. The news of Jim Bridger's arrival and the swift rumor that he would serve as pilot for the train over the dangerous portion of the route ahead spread an instantaneous feeling of relief throughout the hesitant encampment at this, the last touch with civilization east of the destination. He paused briefly at one or another wagon after he had made his own animals comfortable, laughing and jesting in his own independent way en route to fulfill his promise to himself regarding the trader's rum. In most ways the old scout's wide experience gave his dicta value. In one assertion, however, he was wide of the truth, or short of it. So far from things being as bad as they could be, the rapid events of that same morning proved that still more confusion was to ensue, and that speedily. there came riding into the post from the westward a little party of old-time mountain men, driving their near-spent mounts and packs at a speed unusual even in that land of vast distances. They were headed by a man well known in that vicinity who, though he had removed to California since the fur days, made annual pilgrimage to meet the emigrant trains at Fort Hall in order to do proselyting for California, extolling the virtues of that land and picturing in direst fashion the horrors of the road thence to Oregon and the worthlessness of Oregon if ever attained. Old Greenwood was the only name by which he was known. He was an old man, past 80 then, some said, with a deep blue eye and long white hair, a long and unkempt beard, and a tongue of unparalleled profanity. He came in now, shouting and singing, as did the men of the mountains making the rendezvous in the old days. "How, Greenwood, what brings ye here so late?" demanded his erstwhile crony, Jim Bridger, advancing, tin cup in hand, to meet him. "Light, eat, special, drink. How to the old times?" "Old times be damned!" exclaimed old Greenwood. "These is new times." He lifted from above the chafed lips of his trembling horse 2 sacks of something very heavy. "How much is this worth to ye?" he demanded of Bridger and the trader. "Have ye any shovels? Have ye any picks? Have ye flour, meal, sugar, anything?" "Gold!" exclaimed Jim Bridger. Kit Carson did not lie. He never did. And they did not know how much this was worth. They had no scales for raw gold, nor any system of valuation for it. And they had no shovels and no pickaxes. And since the families had come, they now had very little flour at Fort Hall. But now they had the news. This was the greatest news that ever came to old Fort Hall. The greatest news America knew for many a year, or the world. The news of the great gold strikes in California. Old Greenwood suddenly broke out. "Have we left the mines and come this fur for nothing? I tell ye, we must have supplies. $100 for a pick, $100 for a shovel, $100 for a pair of blankets, an ounce for a box of sardines, damn ye, an ounce for half a pound of butter, a half ounce for an egg, anything you like for anything that's green, 300 for a gallon of liquor, an ounce for a box of pills, 800 for a barrel of flour, same for pork, same for sugar, same for coffee. Damn ye picayune hides, we'll show ye what prices is, what's money to us. We can get the pure gold that money's made out of, and get it all we want. Hooray for Californy!" He broke into song. His comrades roared in Homeric chorus with him, passing from one to another of the current ditties of the mines. They declared in unison, "Old Grimes is dead, that good old man." Then they swung off to yet another classic ballad. "There was an old woman who had 3 sons, Joshua, James, and John. Josh got shot, and Jim got drowned, and John got lost and never was found. And that was the end of the woman's 3 sons, Joshua, James, and John." Having finished the obsequies of the 3 sons, not once but many times, they went forward with yet another adaptation, following old Greenwood, who stood with head thrown back and sang with tones of passion, "Oh, then, Susanna, don't you cry for me. I'm going to California with my washpan on my knee." The news of the gold was out. Bridger forgot his cups, forgot his friends, hurried to Molly Wingate's cart again. "It's true, Miss Molly," he cried, "truer'n true hitself. Yon's men just is from Californy, and they've got 2 horseloads of gold, and they say it's nothing. They come out for supplies. They tried to stop Will Banion. They did trade some with Woodhull. They're nigh to Humboldt by now, and going hard. Miss Molly gal, he's in ahead of the whole country, and got 6 months by hisself. Lord give him luck. It'll be winter afore the men back east can know. He's 1 year ahead, thanks to yer lie ter me and to Kit, and Kit's to his general. Gold, you can't hide it, and you can't find it, and you can't dig it up, and you can't keep it down. Miss Molly gal, I like ye, but how I do wisht ye was a man, so's you and me could celebrate this here fittin'." "Listen," said the girl, "our bugle, that's assembly." Yes, they'll all be here. Come when ye kin. Hell's a-poppin' now." The emigrants, indeed, deserted their wagons, gathering in front of the stockade, group after group. There was a strange scene on the far-flung, unknown, fateful borderlands of the country Senator McDuffie but now had not valued at $5 for the whole. All these now, halfway across, and with the ice and snow of winter cutting off pursuit for a year, had the great news, which did not reach publication in the press of New York and Baltimore until September of 1848. It did not attain notice of the floor of Congress until December 5th of that year, although this was news that went to the very foundation of this republic, which indeed was to prove the means of the perpetuity of this republic. The drunken hunters in their ragged wools, their stained skins, the emigrants in their motley garb, come this far they knew not why, since men will not admit of destiny in nations, also knew not that they were joying over the death of slavery and the life of the Union. They did not know that now. In a flash all the old arguments and citations over slavery and secession were ancient and of no avail. The wagoneers of the Sangamon in Illinois, gathered here roistering, did not know that they were dancing on the martyr's grave of Lincoln, or weaving him his crown, or buying shot and shell for him to win his grievous ordeal. Brother against brother. Yet all those things were settled then, beyond that range of the Rockies which senators had said they would not spend $1 to remove, were they no more than 10 feet high. Even then the Rockies fell. Even then the great trains of the covered wagons, driven by men who never heard of destiny, achieved their places on the unwritten scroll of time. The newcomers from beyond the Sierras, crazed with their easy fortune, and now inflamed yet further by the fumes of alcohol, even magnified the truth as it then seemed. They spent their dust by the handful. They asked for skillets, cooking pans, that they could wash more gold. They wanted saws, nails, axes, hammers, picks. They said they would use the wagon boxes for long toms. They said if men would unite in companies to dam and divert the California rivers, they would lay bare ledges of broken gold which would need only scooping up. The miners would pay anything for labor in iron and wood. They would buy any food, and all there was of it, at $1 a pound. They wanted pack horses to cross the Humboldt Desert loaded. They would pay any price for men to handle horses for a fast and steady flight, because they said there was no longer any use in measuring life by the old standards of value. Wages at 4 bits a day, $1 a day, $2, the old prices. Why, no man would work for half an hour for such return, when any minute he might lift $20 in the hollow of an iron spoon. Old Greenwood had panned his 500 in a day. Men had taken 2,000, 3 in a week. In a week, men, not in a year. There could be no wage scale at all. Labor was a thing gone by. Wealth, success, ease, luxury was at hand for the taking. What a man had dreamed for himself he now could have. He could overleap all the confining limits of his life, and even if weak, witless, ignorant, or in despair, throw all that aside in one vast bound into attainment and enjoyment. Rich? Why should any man remain poor? Work? Why should work be known, save the labor of picking up pure gold, done, finished, delivered at hand to waiting and weary humanity? Human cravings could no longer exist. Human disappointment was a thing no more to be known. In California, just yonder, was gold, gold, gold. Do you mind? Can you think of it, men? Gold, gold, gold. The sun had arisen at last on the millennium day. Now might man be happy and grieve no more forever. Arguments such as these did not lack and were not needed with the emigrants. It took but a leap to the last conclusion. Go to California? Why should they not go? Had it not been foreordained that they should get the news here before it was too late? 50 miles more, and they had lost it. A week earlier, and they would not have known it for a year. Go to Oregon and plow? Why not go to California and dig in a day what a plow would earn in a year? Call it stubbornness or steadfastness. At least Jesse Wingate's strength of resolution now became manifest. At first, almost alone, he stayed the stampede by holding out for Oregon in the council with his captains. They stood near the Wingate wagon, the same which had carried him into Indiana, thence into Illinois, and now this far on the long way to Oregon. Old and gray was Mary Ann, as he called his wagon by now, the paint ground from the felly, spoke, and hub, the sides dust-covered, the tilt disfigured and discolored. He gazed at the time-worn, sturdy frame with something akin to affection. The spokes were wedged to hold them tight. The rims were bound with hide, worn away at the edges where the tire gave no covering. The tires had been reset again and again. He shook the nearest wheel to test it. "Yes," said he, "we all show wear, but I see little use in changing a plan once made in a man's best sober judgment. For me, I don't think all the world has been changed overnight." "Oh, well, now," demanded Kelsey, his nomad Kentucky blood dominant, "what use holding to any plan just for the sake of doing it? If something better comes, why not take it? That stands to reason. We all came out here to better ourselves. These men have done in 6 months what you and I might not do in 10 years in Oregon." "They'd guide us through to California, too," he went on. "We've no guide to Oregon." Even Caleb Price nodded. "They all say that the part from here on is the worst. Drier and drier, and in places very rough. And the 2 fords of the Snake, well, I for one wish we were across them. That's a big river and a bad one. And if we cross the Blue Mountains all right, there's the Cascades, worse than the Blues, and no known trail for wagons." "I may have to leave my wagons," said Jesse Wingate, "but if I do, I aim to leave them as close to the Willamette Valley as I can. I came out to farm. I don't know California. How about you, Hall? What do your neighbors say?" "Much as Price says. They're worn out and scared. They've been talking about the Snake crossings ever since we left the Soda Springs. Half want to switch for California. A good many others would like to go back home if they thought they'd ever get there." "But we've got to decide," urged Wingate. "Can we count on 30 wagons to go through? Others have got through in a season, and so can we if we stick." Price, his hesitant glance at his staunch trail friend's face, decided the latter. "I'll stick for Oregon," said Caleb Price. "I've got my wife and children along. I want my donation lands." "You, Hall?" "I'll go with you," said Hall, the third column leader, slowly. "Like to try a whirl in California, but if there's so much gold there next year'll do. I want my lands." "Why, there's almost 10,000 people in Oregon by now, or will be next year," argued Wingate. "It may get to be a territory. Maybe not a state, but anyways a territory sometime. And it's free, not like Texas and all this new Mexican land just coming in by the treaty. What do you say, finally, Kelsey?" The latter chewed tobacco for some time. "You put it to me hard to answer," said he. "Any one of us would like to try California. It will open faster than Oregon if all this gold news is true. Maybe 10,000 people will come out next year for all we know." "Yes, with picks and shovels," said Jesse Wingate. "Did ever you see pick or shovel build a country? Did ever you see steel traps make or hold one? Oregon's ours because we went out 5 years ago with wagons and plows. We all know that. No, friends, waterways never held a country. No path ever held on a river. That's for exploring, not for farming. To hold a country, you need wheels. You need a plow. I'm for Oregon." "You put it strong," admitted Kelsey. "But the only thing that holds me back from California is the promise we four made to each other when we started. Our train's fallen apart little by little. I'm old Kentucky. We don't rue back, and we keep our word. We four said we'd go through. I'll stand by that. I'm a man of my word." Imperiously, as though he were Pizarro himself, he drew a line in the dust of the trail. "Who's for Oregon?" he shouted, again demanded as silence fell. "This side for Oregon!" And Kelsey of Kentucky, man of his word, turned the stampede definitely. Wingate, his 3 friends, a little group augmenting, crossed for Oregon. The women and the children stood aloof. Sun-bonneted women, brown, some with newborn trail babes in arms, silent as they always stood. Across from the Oregon band stood almost as many men, for the most part unmarried, who had not given hostages to fortune and were resolved for California. A cheer arose from these. "Who wants my plow?" demanded a stalwart farmer from Indiana. "More than 1,500 miles from his last home. I brung her this fur into this damn desert. I'll trade her for a shovel and make one more try for my folks back home." He loosed the wires which had bound the implement to the tail of his wagon all these weary miles. It fell to the ground, and he left it there. Do some thinking, men, before you count your gold and drop your plow. Gold don't last, but the soil does. Ahead of you is the Humboldt Desert. There's no good wagon road over the mountains if you get that far. The road down Mary's River is a real gamble with death. Men can go through and make roads, yes, but where are the women and the children to stay? Think twice, men, and more than twice. Wingate spoke solemnly. "Roll out," mocked the man who had abandoned his plow. "This way for California." The council ended in a turmoil. Where hitherto had been no more than a sedate daily system, routine had become custom, gave way to restless movement, excited argument. Of all these hundreds now encamped on the sandy sagebrush plain in the high desert, there was not an individual who was not affected in one way or another by the news from California, and in most cases it required some sort of a personal decision, made practically upon the moment. Men argued with their wives heatedly. Women gathered in groups, talking, weeping. The stoic calm of the trail was swept away in a sort of hysteria which seemed to upset all their world and all its old values. Whether for Oregon or California, a revolution in prices was worked overnight for every purchase of supplies. Flour, horses, tools, everything merchantable doubled and more than doubled. Some 50 wagons in all now formed train for California, which, in addition to the long line of pack animals, left the Sangamon caravan, so-called, at best little more than half what it had been the day before. The men without families made up most of the California train. The agents for California, by force of habit, still went among the wagons and urged the old arguments against Oregon. The savage tribes on ahead, the forbidding desolation of the land, the vast and dangerous rivers, the certainty of starvation on the way, the risk of arriving after winter had set in on the Cascade Range, all matters of which they themselves spoke by hearsay. All the great West was then unknown. Moreover, Fort Hall was a natural division point, as quite often a third of the wagons of a train might be bound for California even before the discovery of gold. But Wingate and his associates felt that the Oregon immigration for that year, even handicapped as now, ultimately would run into thousands. It was mid-morning of the next blazing day when he beckoned his men to him. "Let's pull out," he said. "Why wait for the Californians to move? Bridger will go with us across the Snake. 'Twill only be the worse the longer we lie here, and our wagons are 2 weeks late now." The others agreed, but there was now little train organization. The old cheery call, "Catch up, catch up," was not heard. The group, the family, the individual now began to show again. True, after their leaders came one after another, rattling faded wagons until the dusty trail that led out across the sage flats had a tendency stretched out for over half-mile, with yet other vehicles falling in behind, but silent and grim, were young and old now over this last defection. "About that old man Greenwood," said Molly Wingate to her daughter, as they sat on the same jolting seat. "I don't know about him. I've saw elders in the church with whiskers as long and white as his'n, but you'd better watch your hog pen. For me, I believe he's a liar. It's like enough it's true he used to live back in the Rockies in Injun times, and he may be 85 years old, as he says, and California may have a wonderful climate, the way he says, but some things I can't believe. He says now he knows a man out in California, a Spanish man, who was 250 years old, and he had quite a lot of money, gold and silver, he dug out of the mountains. Greenwood says he's known of gold and silver for years himself. Well, this Spanish man had relatives that wanted his property, and he'd made a will and left it to them, but he wouldn't die. The climate was so good. So his folks allowed maybe if they sent him to Spain on a journey, he'd die, and then they'd get the property legal. So he went, and he did die, but he left orders for his body to be sent back to California to be buried. So when his body came, they buried him in California the way he asked, so Greenwood says. But did they get his property? Not at all. The old Spanish man, almost as soon as he was buried in California dirt, he came to life again. He's alive today and out there, and this man Greenwood says he's a neighbor of his, and he knows him well. Of course, if that's true, you can believe almost anything about what a wonderful country California is. But for one, I ain't right sure. Maybe not everybody who goes to California is going to find a mountain of gold or live to be 300 years old. But to think, Molly, here you knew all this away back to Laramie. Well, if the hoorah had started there, 'stead of here, there'd be dead people now back of us more'n there is now. That old man Bridger told you. Why? And how could you keep the secret? It was for Will, said Molly simply. I had given him up. I told him to go to California and forget me, and to live things down. Don't chide me any more. I tried to marry the man you wanted me to marry. I'm tired. I'm going to Oregon to forget. I'll teach school. I'll never, never marry. That's settled at last. You got a letter from Sarah Woodhull, too? Yes, I did. Does he call that settled? Is he going to California to forget you and live things down? He says not. I don't care what he says. He'll be back. Spare his journey. It will do him no good. The Indians did me a kindness, I tell you. Well, anyways, they're both off on the same journey now, and who knows what or which. They both may be 300 years old before they find a mountain of gold. But to think, I had your chunk of gold right in my own hands, but didn't know it. The same gold my mother's wedding ring was made of, that was mine. It's right thin now, child. You could have made a dozen out of that lump, like enough. I'll never need one, mother, said Molly Wingate. The girl, weeping, threw her arms about her mother's neck. You ask why I kept the secret even then. He kissed me, mother, and he was a thief. Yes, I know. A man, he just steals a girl's heart out through her lips. Your pa done the same way with me once. Get up, Dan. You, Daisy. And from that time on, she added, laughing, I've been trying to forget him and to live him down. End of chapter 38. Chapter 39 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. Chapter 39. The Crossing. 3 days out from Fort Hall, the vanguard of the remnant of the train, less than a fourth of the original number, saw leaning against a gnarled sagebrush a box lid which had scrawled upon it in straggling letters one word, California. Here now were to part the pick and the plow. Jim Bridger, sitting his gaunt horse, rifle across saddle horn, halted for the head of the train to pull even with him. This here's Cassia Creek, said he. Yon's the trail down Raft River to the Humboldt and across the Sierras to California. A long, dry jump it is by all accounts. The Oregon road goes on down the Snake. It's longer, if not so dry. Small invitation offered in the physical aspect of either path. The journey had become interminable. The unspeakable monotony, whose only variant was peril, had smothered the spark of hope and interest. The allurement of mystery had wholly lost its charm. The train halted for some hours. Once more discussion arose. "Last chance for California, men," said old Jim Bridger calmly. "Do we see the tracks? Here's Greenwood come in. Yon's where Woodhull's wagons left the road. Below that, one side, is the tracks of Banion's mules. I wonder," he added, "why there hain't airy letter left for none of us here at the forks of the road." He did not know that, left in a tin at the foot of the board sign certain days earlier, there had rested a letter addressed to Miss Molly Wingate. It never was to reach her. Sam Woodhull knew the reason why. Having opened it and read it, he had possessed himself of exacter knowledge than ever before of the relations of Banion and Molly Wingate. Bitter as had been his hatred before, it now was venomous. He lived thenceforth no more in hope of gold than of revenge. The decision for or against California was something for serious weighing now at the last hour, and it affected the fortune and the future of every man, woman, and child in all the train. Never a furrow was plowed in early Oregon but ran in bones and blood, and never a dollar was dug in gold in California, or ever gained in gold by any man, which did not cost two in something else but gold. 12 wagons pulled out of the trail silently, one after another, and took the winding trail that led to the left, to the west and south. Others watched them, tears in their eyes, for some were friends. Alone on her cart seat, here at the fateful parting of the ways, Molly Wingate sat with a letter clasped in her hand, frank tears standing in her eyes. It was no new letter, but an old one. She pressed the pages to her heart, to her lips, held them out at arm's length before her in the direction of the far land which somewhere held its secrets. "Oh, God keep you, Will," she said in her heart, and almost audibly. "Oh, God give you fortune, Will, and bring you back to me." But the Oregon wagons closed up once more and held their way, the stop not being beyond one camp, for Bridger urged haste. The caravan course now lay along the great valley of the Snake. The giant deeds of the river in its canyons they could only guess. They heard of tremendous falls, of gorges through which no boat could pass, vague rumors of days of earlier exploration, but they kept to the high plateaus, dipping down to the crossings of many sharp streams, which, in the first month of their journey, they would have called impassable. It all took time. They were averaging now not 20 miles daily, but no more than half that. And the season was advancing. It was fall. Back home the wheat would be in stack. The edges of the corn would be seared with frost. The vast abundance of game they had found all along now lacked. Some rabbits, a few sage grouse, nightly coyotes, that made all. The savages who now hung on their flanks lacked the stature and the brave trappings of the buffalo plainsmen. They lived on horse meat and salmon, so the rumor came. Now their environment took hold of the Pacific. They had left the East wholly behind. On the salmon run they could count on food, not so good as the buffalo, but better than the bacon grown soft and rusty. Changing, accepting, adjusting, prevailing, the wagons went on day after day, 50 miles, 100, 200, but always a vague uneasiness pervaded. The crossing of the Snake lay on ahead. The moody river had cast upon them a feeling of awe. Around the sage fires at night the families talked of little else but the ford of the Snake, 2 days beyond the Salmon Falls. It was morning when the wagons, well drawn together now, at last turned down the precipitous decline which took them from the high plateau to the water level. Here a halt was called. Bridger took full charge. The formidable enterprise confronting them was one of the real dangers of the road. The strong green waters of the great river were divided at this ancient ford by 2 midstream islands, which accounted for the selection of the spot for the daring essay of the bridgeless and boatless crossing. There was something mockingly relentless in the strong rippling current, which cut off more than a guess at the actual depth. There was no ferry, no boat, nor means of making one. It was not even possible to shore up the wagon beds so they might be dry. One thing sure was that if ever a wagon was swept below the crossing, there could be no hope for it. But others had crossed here, and even now a certain rough chart existed, handed down from these. Time now for a leader, and men now were thankful for the presence of a man who had seen this crossing made. The old scout held back the company leaders and rode into the stream alone, step by step, scanning the bottom. He found it firm. He saw wheel marks on the first island. His horse, ears ahead, saw them also, and staggeringly felt out the way. Belly deep and passable, yes. Bridger turned and moved a wide arm. The foremost wagons came on to the edge. The men now mounted the wagon seats, 2 to each wagon. Flankers drove up the loose cattle, ready for their turn later. Men rode on each side the lead yoke of oxen to hold them steady on their footing. Wingate, Price, Kelsey, and Hall, bold men and well mounted, taking this work on themselves. The plunge once made, they got to the first island, all of them, without trouble. But a dizzying flood lay on ahead to the second wheel-marked island in the river. To look at the rapid surface was to lose all sense of direction. But again the gaunt horse of the scout fell out. The riders waded in, their devoted saddle animals trembling beneath them. Bridger, student of fast fords, followed the bar upstream, angling with it till a deep channel offered between him and the island. Unable to evade this, he drove into it, and his gallant mount breasted up and held its feet all the way across. The thing could be done. Jim Bridger calmly turned and waved to the wagons to come on from the first island. "Keep them jest where they was," he called back to Hall and Kelsey, who had not passed the last stiff water. "Put the heavy cattle in fust. It maybe won't swim them. If the stuff gets wet, we can't help that. Tell the wimern it's all right." He saw his friends turn back, their horses deep in the flood, plunging through water broken by their knees, saw the first wagons lead off and crawl out upstream, slowly and safely, till within reach of his voice. Molly now was in the main wagon, and her brother Jed was driving. Between the lines of waiting horsemen, the draft oxen advanced, following the wagons strung out, but all holding their footing in the green water that broke white on the upper side of the wagons. A vast murmuring roar came up from the water thus retarded. They made their way to the edge of the deep channel, where the cattle stood, breasts submerged. Bridger rose in his stirrups and shouted, "Get in there! Come on through!" They plunged, wallowed, staggered, but the lead yoke saw where the ford climbed the bank, made for it, caught footing, dragged the others through. Wagon after wagon made it safe. It was desperate, but being done, these matter-of-fact folk wasted no time in imaginings of what might have happened. They were safe, and the ford thus far was established so that the others need not fear. But on ahead lay what they all knew was the real danger. The last channel, 300 yards of racing heavy water which apparently no sane man ever would have faced. But there were wheel marks on the farther shore. Here ran the road to Oregon. The dauntless old scout rode in again, alone, bending to study the water and the footing. A gravel bar led off for a couple of rods, flanked by deep potholes. 10 rods out the bar turned. He followed it up foot by foot for 20 rods, quartering. Then he struck out for the shore. The bottom was hard, yes, but the bar was very crooked, with swimming water on either hand, with potholes 10 feet deep and more, all alongside. And worst of all, there was a vast sweep of heavy water below the ford, which meant destruction and death for any wagon carried down. Well had the crossing of the Snake earned its sinister reputation. Courage and care alone could give any man safe conduct here. The women and children, crying, sat in the wagons watching Bridger retrace the ford. Once his stumbling horse swam, but caught footing. He joined them, very serious. "It's fordin' men," said he, "but she's mean. She sure is mean. Double up all the teams. Yoke in every loose ox and put 6 yoke on each wagon, they'll get swept down sure as hell. Some of them will hold the others if we have enough. I'll go ahead, and I want riders all along the teams, above and below, to hold them in line. It can be done. It's wicked water, but it can be did. Don't wait. Always keep things moving." By this time the island was packed with the loose cattle which had followed the wagons, much of the time swimming. They were lowing meaningly in terror, a gruesome thing to hear. The leader called to Price's oldest boy, driving Molly's cart. "Tie on behind the big wagon with a long rope, and don't drive in till you see the first 2 yoke ahead holding. Then they'll drag you through anyhow. Hang on to the cart, whatever happens, but if you do get in, keep upstream of any animal that's swimming. All set, men? Come ahead." He led off again at last, after the teams were doubled and the loads had been piled high as possible to keep them dry. 10 wagons were left behind, it being needful to drive back over the roaring channel some of the doubled heavy teams for them. They made it well, foot by foot, the cattle sometimes swimming gently, confidently, as the line curved down under the heavy current, but always enough holding to keep the team safe. The horsemen rode alongside, exhorting, assuring. It was a vast relief when at the last gravel stretch they saw the wet backs of the oxen rise high once more. "I'll go back, Jesse," said Kelsey, the man who had wanted to go to California. "I know her now." "I'll go with you," added young Jed Wingate, climbing down from his wagon seat and demanding his saddle horse, which he mounted barebacked. It was they two who drove and led the spare yokes back to repeat the crossing with the remaining wagons. Those on the bank watched them anxiously, for they drove straighter across to save time and were carried below the trail on the island. But they came out laughing, and the oxen were rounded up once more and doubled in, so that the last of the train was ready. "That's a fine mare of Kelsey's," said Wingate to Caleb Price, who with him was watching the daring Kentuckian at his work on the downstream and more dangerous side of the linked teams. "She'll go anywhere." Price nodded, anxiously regarding the laboring advance of the last wagons. "Too light," said he. "I started with 1.5 tons on the National Pike across Ohio and Indiana. I doubt if we average 500 now. They ford light. Look," he cried suddenly and pointed. They all ran to the brink. The horsemen were trying to stay the drift of the line of cattle. They had worked low and missed footing. Many were swimming. The wagons were afloat. The tired lead cattle had not been able to withstand the pressure of the heavy water a second time. They were off the ford. But the riders from the shore, led by Jim Bridger, got to them, caught a rope around a horn, dragged the whole gaunt team to the edge, and saved the day for the lead wagon. The others caught and held their footing and labored through. But a shout arose. Persons ran down the bank pointing. 100 yards below the ford, in the full current of the Snake, the lean head of Kelsey's mare was flat, swimming hard and steadily, being swept downstream in a current which swung off shore below the ford. "He's all right," called Jed, wet to the neck, sitting his own wet mount, safe ashore at last. "He's swimming too. They'll make it sure. Come on." He started off at a gallop downstream along the shore, his eyes fixed on the two black objects, now steadily losing distance out beyond. But old Jim Bridger put his hands across his eyes and turned away his face. He knew. It was now plain to all that yonder a gallant man and a gallant horse were making a fight for life. The grim river had them in its grip at last. In a moment the tremendous power of the heavy water had swept Kelsey and his horse far below the ford. The current there was swifter, noisier, as though exultant in the success of the scheme the river all along had proposed. As to the victims, the tragic struggle went on in silence. If the man called, no one could hear him above the rush and roar of the waters. None long had any hope as they saw the white rollers bury the two heads of the horse and the man, while the set of the current steadily carried them away from the shore. It was only a miracle that the two bobbing black dots again and again came into view. They could see the mare's muzzle flat, extended toward the shore, back of it, upstream, the head of the man. Whichever brain had decided, it was evident that the animal was staking life to reach the shore from which it had been swept away. Far out in midstream, some conformation of the bottom turned the current once more in a long slant shoreward. A murmur, a sob of hundreds of observers packed along the shore broke out as the two dots came closer, far below. More than a quarter of a mile downstream, a sand point made out, offering a sort of beach where for some space a landing might be made. Could the gallant mare make this point? Men clenched their hands. Women began to sob and to moan gently. When, with a shout, Jed Wingate turned his horse and set off at top speed down the shore, some followed him. The horses and oxen, left alone, fell into confusion. The wagons tangled. 1 or 2 teams made off at a run into the desert, but these things were nothing. Those behind hoped Jed would not try any rescue in that flood. Molly stood wringing her hands. The boy's mother began praying audibly. The voice of Jim Bridger rose in an Indian chant. It was for the dead. They saw the gallant mare plunge up, back and shoulders and body rising as her feet found bottom a few yards out from shore. She stood free of the water, safe on the bar, stood still, looking back of her and down. But no man rose to his height beside her. There was only one figure on the bar. They saw Jed fling off, saw him run and stoop, lifting something long and heavy from the water. Then the mare stumbled away. At length she lay down quietly. She never rose. "She was standing right here," said Jed as the others came. "He had hold of the reins so tight I couldn't hardly open his hand. He must have been dead before the mare hit bottom. He was laying all under water, hanging to the reins, and that was all that kept him from washing on down." They made some rude and unskilled attempts at resuscitation, but had neither knowledge nor confidence. Perhaps somewhere out yonder the strain had been too great. Perhaps the sheer terror had broken the heart of both man and horse. The mare suddenly began to tremble as she lay, her nostrils shivering as though in fright, and then she died, after bringing in the dead man whose hand still gripped her rein. They buried Kelsey of Kentucky. Few knew him otherwise. On a hillock by the road at the first fording place of the Snake, they broke out the top board of another tailgate, and with a hot iron burned in one more record of the road. Robert Kelsey, Kentucky, drowned September 7th, 1848. A brave man. The sand long ago cut out the lettering, and long ago the ford passed to a ferry. But there lay for a long time known Kelsey of Kentucky, a brave man, who kept his promise and did not rue back, but who never saw either California or Oregon. "Catch up the stockmen," said Jesse Wingate dully, after a time. "Let's leave this place." Loads were repacked, broken gear adjusted. Inside the hour the silent gray wagon train held on, leaving the waters to give shriving. The voice of the river rose and fell mournfully behind them in the changing airs. "I knowed hit," said old Jim Bridger, now falling back from the lead and breaking off his Indian dirge. "I knowed all along the Snake'd take somebody. She does every time. This morning I seed 2 ravens that flew across the trail yesterday. Yesterday I seed a rabbit settin' squar in the trail. I thought it was me the river wanted, but she done took a younger and a better man." "Man, man!" exclaimed stout-hearted Molly Wingate. "What for kind of a country have you brought us women to? One more thing like that, and my nerve's gone. Tell me, is this the last bad river, and when will we get to Oregon?" "Don't be a-scared, ma'am," rejoined Bridger. "A accident can happen anywheres. It's a month on to Oregon, whar you're headin'. Some fords on ahead, yes, we got to cross back to the south side of the Snake again. But you'll go on with us, won't you?" demanded young Molly Wingate. They had halted to breathe the cattle at the foot of the lava dust slope. Bridger looked at the young girl for a time in silence. "I'm off my country, Miss Molly," said he. "Beyont the second ford at Fort Boise I ain't never been. I done aimed to turn back here and get back home afore the winter come. Ain't I did enough for you?" But he hesitated. There was a kindly light on the worn old face and the sunken blue eye. "You want me to go on, Miss Molly?" "If you could, it would be a comfort to me, a protection to us all." "Is it so? Miss Molly, you can talk a old-time man out of his last pelt. But since you do want me, I'll saunter along a leetle ways further with ye. Many a good fight is spoiled by wondering how it's going to come out, and many a long trail's lost by wondering whar it runs. I ain't never yet been plumb to Californy or Oregon, but if ye say I must, Miss Molly, why, I must. And if I must, why, here I goes. I reckon my wimern can keep my fire going until I get back next year." End of chapter 39.
Chapter 40 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tim Cote. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. Chapter 40. Oregon, Oregon. The freakish resolves of the old-time trapper at least remained unchanged for many days. But at last, one evening, he came to Molly's wagon, his face grim and sad. "Miss Molly," he said, "I'm come to say good-bye now. It's for keeps. No. Then why? You're like an old friend to me. What don't I owe to you? You don't owe nothing to me yet, Miss Molly. But I want you to think kindly of old Jim Bridger when he's gone. I allow the kindest thing I could do for you is to bring Will Banion to you. You're a good man, James Bridger, said Molly Wingate. But then? You see, Miss Molly, I had 6 quarts of rum I got at Boise. Some folks says rum is wrong. Hit ain't. I'll tell you why. Last night I drinked up my lastest bottle of that Hudson's Bay rum. Hit were right good rum. And as I layin' looking up at the stars, all ter once it come to me that I was just exactly, no more and no less, just to the heart as drunk I was on the little spree with Kit at Laramie. Warn't that fine? And warn't it useful? Natural, being just even up, I done thought of everything I've been forgetting. Hit all come to me as plain as a streak of lightning. What it was Kit Carson told me I know now, but no one else shall know. No, not even you, Miss Molly. I can't tell you, so don't ask. Now I'm going on a long journey, and a risky one. I can't tell you no more. I reckon I'll never see you again. So, goodbye. With a swift grasp of his hand, he caught the dusty edge of the white woman's skirt to his bearded lips. But James... Suddenly, she reached out a hand. He was gone. One winter day, rattling over the icy fords of the road winding down from the White Cascades, crossing the Clackamas, threading the intervening fringe of forest, there broke into the clearing at Oregon City the head of the wagon train of 1848. A fourth of the wagons abandoned and broken, a half of the horses and cattle gone since they had left the banks of the Columbia east of the mountains, the cattle leaning one against the other when they halted, the oxen stumbling and limping, the calluses on their necks torn, raw, and bleeding from the swaying of the yokes on the rocky trail, their tongues out, their eyes glassy with the unspeakable toil they so long had undergone, the loose wheels wobbling, the thin hounds rattling, the canvas sagged and stained, the bucket under each wagon empty, the plow at each tailgate thumping in its lashings of rope and hide. The train of the covered wagons now had, indeed, won through. Now may the picture of our own Ark of Empire never perish from our minds. On the front seat of the lead wagon sat stout Molly Wingate and her husband. Little Molly's cart came next. Alongside the Caleb Price wagon, wherein now sat on the seat, hugging a sore-footed dog whose rawhide boots had worn through, a long-legged, barefoot girl who had walked 1,200 miles since spring, trudged Jed Wingate, now grown from a tousled boy into a lean, self-reliant young man. His long whip was useless in baseless threatenings now, for any driver must spare cattle such as these, gaunt and hollow-eyed, tobacco protuberant and in cheek, his feet half bare, his trousers ragged and fringed to the knee, his sleeves rolled up over brown and brawny arms. Jed Wingate now was enrolled on the list of men. Yee-oh-ah! You Buck and Star, get along there, damn you! So rose his voice, automatically but affectionately. Certain French Canadians, old-time engagés of the fur posts, now become habitants, landowners, on their way home from Sunday chapel, hastened to summon others. The families have come, they called at the falls as they had at Portland town. But now, though safely enlarged at last of the confinement and the penalties of the wagon train, the emigrants, many of them almost destitute, none of them of great means, needed to cast about them at once for their locations and to determine what their occupations were to be. They scattered each seeking his place like new trout in a stream. End of chapter 40. Recording by Tim Cote. of Santa Maria, California, February 12th, 2013. Chapter 41 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tim Cote. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. Chapter 41. The Secrets of the Sierras. Sam Woodhull carried in his pocket the letter which Will Banion had left for Molly Wingate at Cassia Creek in the Snake Valley, where the Oregon Road forked for California. There was no post office there, yet Banion felt sure that his letter would find its way. And it had done so, save for the treachery of this one man. Naught had been sacred to him. He had read the letter without an instant's hesitation, feeling that anything was fair in his love for this woman, in his war with this man. Woodhull resolved that they should not both live. He was by nature not so much a coward as a man without principle or scruple. He did not expect to be killed by Banion. He intended to use such means as would give Banion no chance. In this he thought himself fully justified, as a criminal always does. But hurry as he might, his overdriven teams were no match for the tireless desert horse, the wiry mountain mount, and the hardy mules of the tidy little pack train of Banion and his companion Jackson. These could go on steadily where wagons must wait. Their trail grew fainter as they gained. At last, at the edge of a waterless march of whose duration they could not guess, Woodhull and his party were obliged to halt. Here, by a great good fortune, they were overtaken by the swift pack train of Greenwood and his men, hurrying back with fresh animals on their return march to California. The two companies joined forces. Woodhull now had a guide. Accordingly, when, after such dangers and hardships as then must be inevitable to men covering the gruesome trail between the Snake and the Sacramento, he found himself late that fall arrived west of the Sierras and in the gentler climate of the Central Valley. He looked about him with a feeling of exultation. Now, surely, fate would give his enemy into his hand. Men were spilling south into the valley of the San Joaquin, coming north with proofs of the Stanislaus, the Tuolumne, the Merced. Greenwood insisted on working north into the country where he had found gold, along all the tributaries of the Sacramento. Even then, too, before the great year of '49 had dawned, prospectors were pushing to the head of the creeks making into the American Fork, the Feather River, all the larger and lesser streams heading on the west slopes of the Sierras, and Greenwood even heard of a band of men who had stolen away from the lower diggings and broken off to the north and east, some said heading far up for the Trinity, though that was all unproved country so far as most knew. And now the hatred in Woodhull's sullen heart grew hotter still, for he heard that not 50 miles ahead there had passed a quiet, dark young man riding a black Spanish horse, with him a bearded man who drove a little band of loaded mules. Their progress, so came the story, was up a valley whose head was impassable. The trail could not be obliterated back of them. They were in a trap of their own choosing. All that he needed was patience and caution. Ships and wagon trains came in on the Willamette from the east. They met the coast news of gold. Men of Oregon also left in a mad stampede for California. News came that all the world now was in the mines of California. All over the east, as the later ships also brought in reiterated news, the mad craze of '49 even then was spreading. But the men of '48 were in ahead. From them, scattering like driven game among the broken country over hundreds of miles of forest, plain, benchland, and valley lands, no word could come out to the waiting world. None might know the countless triumphs, the unnumbered tragedies. None ever did know. There, beyond the law, one man might trail another with murder stronger than avarice in his heart, and none ever be the wiser. To hide secrets such as these, the unfathomed mountains reached out their shadowy arms. Now the winter wore on, with such calendar as altitude, latitude, longitude gave it, and the spring of '49 came, east and west, in Washington and New York, at Independence on the Missouri, at Desiree by the Great Salt Lake, in California, in Oregon. Above the land of the early Willamette settlements, 40 or 50 miles up the Yamhill Valley, so a letter from Mrs. Caleb Price to her relatives in Ohio said, the Wingates, leaders of the train, had a beautiful farm near by the Cale Price Mill, as it was known. They had up a good house of 5 rooms, and their cattle were increasing now. They had 40 acres in wheat, with what help the neighbors had given in housing and planting, and wheat would run 50 bushels to the acre there. They bought young trees for an orchard. Her mother had planted roses. They now were fine. She believed they were as good as those she planted in Portland, when first she went through there. Cuttings she had carried with her, seed wheat in the bureau drawer, all the way across from the Saganon. Yes, Jesse Wingate and his wife had done well. Molly, their daughter, was still living with them and still unmarried, she believed. There were many things which Mrs. Caleb Price believed, also many things she did not mention. She said nothing, for she knew nothing, of a little scene between these two as they sat on their little sawn-board porch before their door one evening, looking out over the beautiful and varied landscape that lay spread before them. Their wheat was in the green now. Their hogs reveled in their little clover field. "We've done well, Jesse," at length said portly Molly Wingate. "Look at our place. A mile square for nothing. We've done well, Jesse. I'll admit it." "For what?" answered Jesse Wingate. "What's it for? What has it come to? What's it all about?" He did not have any reply. When he turned, he saw his wife wiping tears from her hard, lined face. "It's Molly," said she. End of chapter 41. Recording by Tim Cote of Santa Maria, California, February 14th, 2013. Chapter 42 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tim Cote. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. Chapter 42. Carson Rides. Following the recession of the snow, men began to push westward up the Platte in the great spring gold rush of 1849. In the forefront of these, outpacing them in his tireless fashion, now passed westward the greatest traveler of his day, the hunter and scout, Kit Carson. The new post of Fort Kearny on the Platte, the old one, Fort Laramie in the foothills of the Rockies, he touched them soon as the grass was green, and as the sun warmed the bunch grass slopes of the North Platte and the Sweetwater, so that his horses could paw out a living, he crowded on westward. He was a month ahead of the date for the wagon trains at Fort Bridger. "How, Chardon?" said he as he drove in his 2 light packs, riding alone as was his usual way, evading Indian eyes as he of all men best knew how. "How, Kit? You're early. Why?" The trader's chief clerk turned to send a boy for Vasquez, Bridger's partner. "Light, Kit, and eat." "Where's Bridger?" demanded Carson. "I've come out of my country to see him. I have government mail for Oregon." "Ooh, for Oregon! Mon Dieu! But Jim," he spread out his hands. "Jim, he's dead, we'll think. We do not know. Now we know the gold news. Maybe so. We know why Jim's he's gone." "Gone? When?" "Last August or September. All at once he took the trail after the immigrant train last year. He'll caught him on Fort Hall, Will heard. But then he go on with those immigrants beyond Hall, beyond the fork of California. He'll not come back. No one know what has become of Jim. He'll been dead, maybe so. Yes, maybe so. Not. The old rat knows his way through the mountains, and he'll take his own time. You think he did not go to California? We'll know he'll didn't. Carson stood and thought for a time. Well, it's bad for you, Chardon. How you mean, Monsieur Kit? Eat your last square meal. Saddle your best horse. Drive 4 packs and 2 saddle mounts along. Oui? And where? To Oregon. To Oregon? Sacré fin. What do you mean? By authority of the government, I command you to carry this packet on to Oregon this season, as fast as safety may allow. Take a man with you. 2. Pick up any help you need, but go through. I cannot go further west myself, for I must get back to Laramie. I had counted on Jim, and Jim's post must see me through. Make your own plans to start tomorrow morning. I'll arrange all that with Vasquez. But, Monsieur, Kit, I cannot. But you shall. You must. You will. If I had a better man, I'd send him. But you are to do what Jim wants done. Oh, mais oui, of course. Yes, and you'll do what the President of the United States commands. Bon Dieu, Kit. That packet is over the seal of the United States of America, Chardon. It carries the signature of the President. It was given to the Army to deliver. The Army has given it to me. I give it to you, and you must go. It is for Jim. He would know. It must be placed in the hands of the circuit judge acting under the laws of Oregon, whoever he may be, and wherever. Find him in the Willamette country. Your pay will be more than you think, Chardon. Jim would know, dead or alive, you do this for him. You can do 30 miles a day. I know you as a mountain man. Ride. Tomorrow I start east to Laramie, and you start west for Oregon. And in the morning, following 2 riders left Bridgers for the trail. They parted, each waving a hand to the other. End of chapter 42. Recording by Tim Cote of Santa Maria, California, February 15th, 2013. Chapter 43 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tim Cote. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. Chapter 43. The Killer Killed. A rough, low cabin of logs, hastily thrown together, housed through the winter months of the Sierra foothills the 2 men who now, in the warm days of early June, sat by the primitive fireplace cooking a midday meal. The older man, thin, bearded, who now spun a side of venison ribs on a cord in front of the open fire, was the mountain man, Bill Jackson, as anyone might tell who had ever seen him, for he had changed but little. That his companion, younger, bearded, dressed also in buckskins, was Will Banion. It would have taken closer scrutiny even of a friend to determine, so much had the passing of these few months altered him in appearance and in manner. Once light of mane, now he smiled never at all. For hours he would seem to go about his duties as an automaton. He spoke at last to his ancient and faithful friend, kindly as ever, and with his own alertness and decision. Let's make it our last meal on the Trinity, Bill. What do you say? Why? What's eating you, boy? Getting restless again? Yes, I want to move. Most does. We've got enough, Bill. The last month has been a crime. The spring snows uncovered a fortune for us, and you know it. Oh, yes, 801 day ain't bad for 2 men that never had saw a gold pan a year ago. But she ain't petered yet. With what we've learned and what we know, we can stay in here and get so rich that it'll sure makes me cry just thinking o' trapping beaver. even before 1836 when the beaver market busted. Why, Rich, well, it's like you say, plumb wrong. We done hit so damned easy, I lay awake nights planning how to spend my share of this pile. We must have $50,000-$60,000 of dust buried under the floor, don't you think? Yes, more. But if you'll agree, I'll sell this claim to the company below us and let them have the rest. They offer $50,000 flat, and it's enough. More than enough. I want two things: to get Jim Bridger his share safe and sound, and I want to go to Oregon. The old man paused in the act of splitting off a deer rib from his roast. You're one awful damn fool, ain't you, Will? I did hope to finish up here brillin' my meat in a yaller gold fireplace, but no matter how plain and simple a man's taste is, allus something comes along to bust 'em up. Well, go on and finish your meal in this plain fireplace of ours, Bill. It's done us very well. I think I'll go down to the sluice a while. Banion rose, left the cabin, stooping at the low door. Moodily he walked along the side of the steep ravine to which the little structure clung. Below him lay the ripped open slope where the little stream had been diverted. Below again lay the bared bed of the exploited watercourse, floored with boulders set in deep gravel, at times with seamy dams of flat rock lying under and across the gravel stretches. The bedrock, ages old, holding in its hidden fingers the rich secrets of immemorial time. Here he and his partner had, in a few months of strenuous labor, taken from the narrow and unimportant rivulet more wealth than most could save in a lifetime of patient and thrifty toil. Yes, fortune had been kind, and it had all been so easy, so simple, so unagitating, so matter-of-fact. The hillside now looked like any other hillside, innocent as a woman's eyes, yet covering how much? Banion could not realize that now, young though he was a rich man. He climbed down the side of the ravine, the little stones rattling under his feet, until he stood on the bared floor of the bedrock which had proved so unbelievably prolific in coarse gold. There was a sharp bend in the ravine, and here the unpaid toil of the little waterway had, ages long, carried and left especially deep strata of gold-shot gravel. As he stood, half musing, Will Banion heard on the ravine side around the bend the tinkle of a falling stone, lazily rolling from one impediment to another. It might be some deer or other animal, he thought. He hastened to get view of the cause, whatever it might be, and then fate, chance, the goddess of fortune, which some men say does not exist, but which all wilderness goers know does exist, for one instant paused, with Will Banion's life and wealth and happiness lightly a balance in cold, disdainful fingers. He turned the corner. Almost level with his own, he looked into the eyes of a crawling man who, stooped, one hand steadying himself against the slant of the ravine, the other below, carrying a rifle, was peering frowningly ahead. It was an evil face, bearded, aquiline, not unhandsome, but evil in its plain meaning now. The eyes were narrowed, the full lips drawn close, as though some tense emotion now approached its climax. The appearance was that of strain, of nerves stretched in some purpose long sustained. And why not? When a man would do murder, when that has been his steady and premeditated purpose for a year, waiting only for opportunity to serve his purpose, that purpose itself changes his very lineaments, alters his whole cast of countenance. Other men avoid him, knowing unconsciously what is in his soul, because of what is written on his face. For months most men had avoided Woodhull. It was known that he was on a manhunt. His questions, his movements, his changes of locality showed that, and Woodhull was one of those who cannot avoid a severance, needing it for their courage's sake, now morose and brooding, now loudly profane, now laughing, or now aloof. His errand in these unknown hills was plain. Well, he was not alone among men whose depths were loosed. Some time his hour might come. It had come, He stared now full into the face of his enemy. He at last had found him. Here stood his enemy, unarmed, delivered into his hands. For one instant the two stood, staring into one another's eyes. Banion's advance had been silent. Woodhull was taken as much unawares as he. It had been Woodhull's purpose to get a stand above the sluices, hidden by the angle where he could command the reach of the stream bed where Banion and Jackson last had been working. He had studied the place before and meant to take no chances. His shot must be sure. But now, in his climbing on the steep hillside, his rifle was in his left hand, downhill, and his footing, caught as he was with one foot half raised, was insecure. At no time these last 4 hours had his opportunity been so close, or so poor, as precisely now. He saw Will Banion's eyes, suddenly startled, quickly estimating, looking into his own. He knew that behind his own eyes, his whole foul soul lay bared, the soul of a murderer. Woodhull made a swift spring down the hill, scrambling, half erect, and caught some sort of stance for the work which now was his to do. He snarled, for he saw Banion stoop, unarmed. It would do his victim no good to run. There was time even to exult, and that was much better in a long-deferred matter such as this. "Now, damn you, I've got you." He gave Banion that much chance to see that he was now to die. Half leaning, he raised the long rifle to its line and touched the trigger. The report came, and Banion fell. But even as he wheeled and fell, stumbling down the hillside, his flung arm apparently had gained a weapon. It was not more than the piece of rotten quartz he had picked up and planned to examine later. He flung it straight at Woodhull's face, an act of chance, of instinct. By a hair it saved him. Firing and missing at a distance of 50 feet, Woodhull remained not yet a murderer indeed. In a flash, Banion gathered and sprang toward him as he stood in a half-second of consternation at seeing his victim fall and rise again. The rifle carried but the one shot. He flung it down, reached for his heavy knife, raising an arm against the second piece of rock which Banion flung as he closed. He felt his wrist caught in an iron grip, felt the blood gush where his temple was cut by the last missile, and then once more, on the narrow bared floor that but now was patterned in parquetry traced in yellow, and soon must turn to red, it came to man and man between them, and it was free. They fell and stumbled so that neither could much damage the other at first. Banion knew he must keep the impounded hand back from the knife sheath, or he was done. Thus close, he could make no escape. He fought fast and furiously, striving to throw, to bend, to beat back the body of a man almost as strong as himself, and now a maniac in rage and fear. The sound of the rifle shot rang through the little defile. To Jackson, shaving off bits of sweet meat between thumb and knife blade, it meant the presence of a stranger, friend or foe, for he knew Banion had carried no weapon with him. His own long rifle he snatched from its pegs. At a long, easy lope he ran along the path which carried across the face of the ravine. His moccasined feet made no sound. He saw no one in the creek bed or at the long turn, but knew there came a loud, wordless cry which he knew was meant for him. It was Will Banion's voice. The two struggling men grappled below him, had no notion of how long they had fought. It seemed an age. And the denouement yet another age deferred, but to them came the sound of a voice. "Get away, Will! Stand back!" It was Jackson. They both, still gripped, looked up the bank. The long barrel of a rifle, foreshortened to a black point, above it a cold eye, fronted and followed them as they swayed. The crooked arm of the rifleman was motionless, save as it just moved that deadly circle an inch this way, an inch back again. Banion knew that this was murder, too, but he knew that naught on earth could stay it now. To guard as much as he could against a last desperate knife thrust, even of a dying man, he broke free and sprang back as far as he could, falling prostrate on his back as he did so, tripped by an unseen stone. But Sam Woodhull was not upon him now, was not willing to lose his own life in order to kill, For just one instant he looked up at the death staring down on him, then turned to run. There was no place where he could run. The voice of the man above him called out sharp and hard, "Halt, Sam Woodhull! Look at me!" He did turn in horror, in fascination at sight of the bright angel. The rifle barrel to his last gaze became a small, round circle, large as a bottle top, and around it shone a fringed aura of red and purple light that might have been the eye. Steadily as when he had held his friend's life in his hand, sighting 5 inches above his eyes, the old hunter drew now above the eyes of his enemy. When the dry report cut the confined air of the valley, the body of Sam Woodhull started forward. The small blue hole, an inch above the eyes, showed the murderer's manhunt done. End of chapter 43. Recording by Tim Cote of Santa Maria, California, February 15th, 2013. Chapter 44 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tim Cote. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. Chapter 44. Yet If Love Lack. Winding down out of the hills into the grassy valley of the upper Sacramento, the little pack train of Banyan and Jackson, 6 hardy mules beside the black horse and Jackson's mountain pony, picked its way along a gashed and trampled creek bed. The kayaks, which swung heavy on the strongest 2 mules, might hold salt, or lead, or gold. It all was one to any who might have seen, and the 2 silent men, the younger ahead, the older behind, obviously were men able to hold their counsel or to defend their property. The smoke of a distant encampment caught the keen eye of Jackson as he rode, humming carefree the burden of a song. "Oh, then, Susanna," admonished the old mountain man, and bade the said Susanna to be as free of care as he himself then and there was. "More men coming in," he said presently. "Wonder who them people is, and if it's peace or war." 3 men, a horse band, 2 Indians. Go in easy, Bill. Banyan slowed down his own gait. His companion had tied the 6 mules together, nose and tail, with the halter of the lead mule wrapped on his own saddle horn. Each man now drew his rifle from the swing loop, but they advanced with the appearance of confidence, for it was evident that they had been discovered by the men of the encampment. Apparently they were identified as well as discovered. A tall man in leggings and moccasins, a flat felt hat over his long gray hair, stood gazing at them, his rifle butt resting on the ground. Suddenly he emitted an unearthly yell, whether of defiance or of greeting, and springing to his own horse's picket pin, gathered in the lariat, and mounting bareback, came on, his rifle high above his head, and repeating again and again his war cry or salutation. Jackson rose in his stirrups, dropped his lead line, and forsook more than $150,000, some 2 mule pack loads of gold. His own yell rose high in answer. "I told you all the world would be here," he shouted back over his shoulder. "Do we see the old thief Jim Bridger? Him I left drunk and happy last summer? Now what in hell brung him here?" The 2 old mountain men flung off and stood hand in hand before Banyan had rescued the precious lead line and brought on the little train. Bridger threw his hat on the ground, flung down his rifle, and cast his stoic calm aside. Both his hands caught Banyan's, and his face beamed, breaking into 1,000 lines. "Boy, it's you then. I'd know your hoss. He has no like in these parts. I've traced ye by him this 100 miles below and up again, but I've had no word this 2 weeks. Mostly I've seed that, when ye ain't looking for a b.r., Thar he is. Well, here we air, fine and fattin', and me with 2 bottles left of something they call cognac down in Yerba Buena. Come on in, and we'll make medicine." They dismounted. The 2 Indians, short, deep-chested, bow-legged men, went to the packs. They gruntled as they unloaded the 2 larger mules. The kayaks were lined up, and the mantas spread over them. The animals led away for feed and water. Bridger produced a ham of venison, some beans, a bannock, and some coffee, not to mention his 2 bottles of fiery fluid, before any word was passed regarding future plans or past events. "Come here, Jim," said Jackson after a time, tin cup in hand. The other followed him, likewise equipped. "Heft this pannier, Jim." "Uh-huh. Well, what of it? What's inter it?" "Not much, Jim. Just 300-400 pounds of gold settin' there in them 4 packs. It ain't much, but it'll help some." Bridger stooped and uncovered the kayaks, unbuckled the cover straps. "It's a true fact," he exclaimed. "Gold! If it ain't, I'm a putrefied liar, and that's all I got to say." Now, little by little, they told, each to other, the story of the months since they had met. Bridger first, explaining his own movements. "I left the Malheur at Boise, and brung along yan 2 boys. You needn't be skeered they'll touch the cargo. The gold means nothing to 'em, but horses does. We've got a good band to drive north now. Some we bought, and most they stole, but no rancher cares for horses here and now. We come through the Klamath, you see, and on south, the old horse trail up from the Spanish country, which only the Injuns knows. My boys say they can take us to the head of the Willamette. So you did get the gold, eh, sir?" said Bridger, his eyes narrowing. "The tip the gal give you was a good one?" "Yes," rejoined Banion, "but we came near losing it and more. It was Woodhull, Jim. He followed us in." "Yes, I know. His wagons was not fur behind you on the Humboldt. He left right after ye did. He made trouble, huh? He'll make no more? Is that it, huh?" Bill Jackson slapped the stock of his rifle in silence. Bridger nodded. He had been close to tragedies all his life. They told him now of this one. He nodded again, close-lipped. "And you wants courts and the settlements, boys?" he said. "For me, when I kill a rattler, that's enough. If you're touchy and want your record clean, why, we can go below and fix it. Only thing is, I don't want to waste no more time than I can help, for some of them horses has a record that ain't maybe so plumb clean their own selves. You ain't going out east. You're going north. It's easier, and a month or 2 closer, with plenty of feed and water, the old Cayuse Trail, huh? So Sam Woodhull got what he's been looking for so long," he added presently. "Well, that simples up things some. He'd have got hit long ago on the Platte, if my partner hadn't been a damn fool," confirmed Jackson. "He was where we could have buried him natural in the sands. I told Will then that Woodhull had murdered him the first chance he got. Well, he did. If he didn't, hit wasn't no credit to either one of them 2. "Oh, what differ does it make, Bill?" remarked Bridger indifferently. "Let bygones be bygones, huh? That's the pleasantest way since he's dead. Now here we air with all the gold there ever was molded, and a whole 2 bottles of cognac left, which takes holt in the most and better'n Hudson's Bay rum. Ain't it a pretty little old world to play with, all with nice pink stripes around it?" He filled his tin, broke into a roaring song. "There was an old widder which had 3 sons, Joshua, James, and John, and one got shot, and one got drowned, and the last un got losted and never was found." "Ain't it funny, son?" he said, turning to Banion with cup uplifted. how stiff liquor allus makes me remember what I done forgot. Now Kit told me that at Laramie, for I'm going out to Oregon with the washpan on my knee, chanted Bill Jackson, now solemnly oblivious of most of his surroundings, and hence not consciously discourteous to his friends. Susanna, don't ye cry. They sat, the central figures of a scene wild enough in a world still primitive and young. Only one of the three remained sober and silent, wondering if one thing lacked, why the world was made. End of chapter 44. Recording by Tim Cote of Santa Maria, California, February 4th, 2013. Chapter 45 of The Covered Wagon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tim Cote. The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH. Chapter 45. The Light of the Whole World. At the new farm of Jesse Wingate on the Yamhill, the wheat was in stack and ready for the flail. His deerskin sacks made ready to carry it to market after the threshing. His grim and weather-beaten wagon stood, now unused, at the barnyard fence of rails. It was evening. Wingate and his wife again sat on their little stoop, gazing down the path that led to the valley road. A mounted man was opening the gate. Someone they did not recognize. "Maybe from below," said Molly Wingate. "Jed's maybe sent up another letter. Leave it to him. He's going to marry the most wonderful girl. Well, I'll call it true. She's a wonderful walker. All the prices was. Or maybe it's for Molly," she added. "If she's ever heard a word from either Sam Woodhull or—" "Hush! I do not want to hear that name," broke in her husband. "Trouble enough he has made for us." His wife made no comment for a moment, still watching the stranger who was now riding up the long approach, little noted by Wingate as he sat, moody and distrait. "Jess," said she, "let's be fair and shame the devil. Maybe we don't know all the truth about Will Banion. You go in the house. I'll tend to this man, whoever he may be." But she did not. With one more look at the advancing figure, she herself rose and followed her husband. As she passed, she cast a swift glance at her daughter, who had not joined them for the twilight hour. Hers was the look of the mother, maternal, solicitous, yet wise and resolved withal, woman understanding woman. And now was the hour for her ewe lamb to be alone. Molly Wingate sat in her own little room, looking through her window at the far forest and the mountain peaks in their evening dress of many colors. She was no longer the tattered emigrant girl in fringed frock and mended moccasins. Ships from the world's great ports served the new market of the Columbia Valley. It was a trim and trig young woman in the habiliments of sophisticated lands, who sat here now, her heavy hair piled high, lighted warmly in the illumination of the window. Her skin, clear, white, had lost its sunburn in the moister climate between the two ranges of mountains. Quiet, reticent, reserved. Cold, some said. But all said Molly Wingate, teacher at the mission school, was beautiful, the most beautiful young woman in all the great Willamette settlements. Her hands were in her lap now, and her face, as usual, was grave. A sad young woman, her Oregon lovers had all said of her. They did not know why she should be sad. So fit for love was she. She heard now a knock at the front door, to which, from her position, she could not have seen anyone approach. She called out, "Come!" but did not turn her head. A horse stamped, neighed near her door. Her face changed expression. Her eyes grew wide, and some strange association of memories suddenly revived. She heard a footfall on the gallery floor, then on the floor of the hall. It stopped. Her heart almost stopped with it. Some undiscovered sense warned her cried aloud to her. She faced the door, wide-eyed, as it was flung open. "Molly." Will Banion's deep-toned voice told her all the rest. In terror, her hands to her face, she stood an instant, then sprang toward him, her voice almost a wail in its incredulous joy. "Will! Will! Oh, Will! Oh! Oh!" "Molly." They both paused. "It can't be! Oh, you frighten me! Will, it can't be you!" But he had her in his arms now. At first he could only push back her hair, stroke her cheek, until at last the rush of life and youth came back to them both, and their lips met in the sealing kiss of years. Then both were young again. She put up a hand to caress his brown cheek. Tenderly he pushed back her hair. "Will! Oh, Will! It can't be!" she whispered again and again. "But it is. It had to be. Now I'm paid. Now I've found my fortune." "And I've made my year to think it over, Will. As though the fortune mattered." "Not so much as the one other thing that kept you and me apart. Now I must tell you—"
No, don't let it be. Tell me nothing. Will, aren't you here?"
"But I must. You must hear it. I've waited 2 years for this."
"Long, Will. You've let me get old."
"You old?" He kissed her in contempt of time. "But now wait, dear, for I must tell you. You see, coming up the valley, I met the clerk of the court of Oregon City, and he knew I was headed up for the Yamhill. He asked me to serve as his messenger. I've been sending up through all the valley settlements in search of one William Banion," he said to me.
Then I told him who I was. He gave me this. "What is it?"
She turned to her lover. He held in his hands a long package, enfolded in an otter skin.
"Is it a court summons for Will Banion? They can't have you, Will."
He smiled, her head held between his two hands. "I have a very important document for Colonel William Banion," the clerk said to me. "It has been for some time in our charge for delivery to him at once should he come into the Oregon settlements. It is from His Excellency the President of the United States. Such messages do not wait. Seeing it of such importance, and knowing it to be military, Judge Lane opened it, since we could not trace the addressee. If you like, if you are indeed Colonel William Banion." That was what he said. He broke off, choking.
"Ah, Molly, at last and indeed I am again William Banion."
He took from the otter skin, which Chardon once had placed over the oilskin used by Carson to protect it, the long and formal envelope of heavy linen. His finger pointed, "On the service of the United States."
"Why, Will."
He caught the envelope swiftly to his lips, holding it there an instant before he could speak.
"My pardon from the President. Not guilty. Oh, not guilty. And I never was. Oh, Will, that makes you happy."
"Doesn't it you?"
"Why, yes, but I knew that always. That I'd follow you to the gallows if that had to be."
"Though I were a thief?"
"Yes, but I'd not believe it. I didn't. I never did. I could not."
"You'd take my word against all the world? Just my word, if I told you it wasn't true? You'd want no proof at all? Will you always believe in me that way? No proof?"
"I want none now."
"You do tell me that?"
No, I'm afraid you'd give me proofs. I want none. I want to love you for what you are, for what we both are. Will, I'm afraid."
He put his hands on her shoulders, held her away arm's length, looked straight into her eyes.
"Dear girl," he said, "you need never be afraid any more."
She put her head down contentedly against his shoulder, her face nestling sideways, her eyes closed, her arms again quite around his neck.
"I don't care, Will," said she. No, don't talk of things."
He did not talk. In the sweetness of the silence, he kissed her tenderly again and again. And now the sun might sink. The light of the whole world by no means died with it. The end. End of chapter 45. Recording by Tim Cote of Santa Maria, California, February 6th, 2013. End of The Covered Wagon by Emerson HOUGH.